Miracle at Camp Friendship. Chapter 11. The Present of Friendship. As we sat cross-legged on the floor and on benches around the fireplace, I noticed that buddies were sitting together. Something special was happening. We were all friends, but only a few of us had been close friends. The buddy system was helping us get to know one another better than before. It was helping us share feelings, plans, and special times. Maybe that was part of the reason for this retreat at Camp Friendship. As Mr. Friendson, Mr. Thriftmore, and Miss Content also found places near the fire, Pastor Gentle cleared his throat and began. I will read a scripture verse from Proverbs, and then I want to tell you a special story. The verse says, Thine own friend and thy father's friend forsake not, neither go into thy brother's house in the day of thy calamity. For better is a neighbour that is near than a brother afar off. Now here's the story. Once there was a little boy about your age. We'll call him Joe. He had 3 sisters and 1 brother, and a new baby brother or sister on the way. Joe was the oldest. His parents were God-fearing folks who were well respected in the community. Nevertheless, the family was rather poor. They weren't poor because Joe's father didn't work hard. He did. Along with his trade, he often did odd jobs around the community and in the nearby town. But with 7 mouths to feed, things were always nip and tuck, as you might say. They made do, though, and they didn't think of themselves as poor. They always had a garden in the summer. Joe's mother sewed most of their clothes, and they got along with the necessities and an occasional luxury. They were believers, and they were happy, loving, and satisfied with what God had given them. As I said before, Joe was the oldest. He was 10, nearly 11 that year. It was close to Thanksgiving, and it was also close to the time for the new baby to be born. Of course he hoped it would be a boy. Yeah, a boy is better, interrupted Ronnie. He was really getting interested in the story. Pastor Gentle didn't seem to mind the interruption. He just smiled at Ronnie and winked at the girls. Then he continued. Well, as I said, it was almost Thanksgiving. The new baby coming meant 1 more mouth to feed, and, of course, there would also be a hospital bill after the baby was born. Then, just a week before Thanksgiving, the family's old car broke down. It was a rather serious breakdown too, and not one that Joe's father could fix. They couldn't afford a new car, so Joe's dad agreed to do odd jobs at the repair shop to pay for what needed to be done to get the car back on the road. That was fine, except that meant no extra income from other odd jobs for a while. The family really depended on those extra odd jobs, especially at that time of year and with the baby coming. The whole situation was something for which the family was not prepared. On Thanksgiving Day, although she was not feeling well, Joe's mother fixed Thanksgiving dinner. Since things were so nip and tuck with the car repairs and the upcoming hospital bill, the family couldn't afford a turkey. Instead, Joe's mother stuffed a tough, old but fat hen. It may not have been as much of a treat as turkey, but they were thankful for the stuffed chicken, and they were blessed with other Thanksgiving treats. When the family sat down to eat, Joe noticed that his mother did not look well. Before the meal was over, he asked Joe's father to take her to the hospital. It was time for the baby to be born. The children were dropped off at the neighbour's home on the way. The baby was born that night, and it was a little girl. Yes, cheered the girls. Why couldn't it have been a boy? Pastor Gentle asked Ronnie. Are you playing favourites with the girls? Pastor Gentle laughed heartily. His chest shook up and down again. No, Ronnie, I'm not playing favourites. I said the baby was a girl because this is a true story. Racer whispered to Booker. I didn't know he really knew these people. I thought he was making it up. May I continue now? Asked the pastor. We all nodded or said, Yes, go on. The whole family was happy that the baby had arrived safely. However, a problem showed up the next day. The baby could not keep food down because a muscle in her stomach wasn't working properly. The doctor told Joe's parents that their baby would have to stay in hospital until they could find out the cause and come up with treatment for the problem. Joe's mother and father prayed and gave the baby into the Lord's care. Still, it meant added medical expenses for which the family budget did not allow. 2 days later, Joe's mother came home, but the baby had to stay in hospital. 1 week went by, then 2. The doctors kept trying to get the baby to keep food down. Every day in the hospital meant the bill was adding up. Then, just 2 weeks before Christmas, Joe and his brother came down with chicken pox. They were miserable with the itching. "Oh, chicken pox," exclaimed Christy. "That is possibly the worst thing that ever happened to me." Those of us who had it agreed, and we got Pastor Gentle off track with his story again, while we swapped horror stories of our experiences. "Children, let's allow Pastor Gentle to continue," suggested Miss Content. "I believe there must be a happy ending to this story and a lesson in it for us all." "Yes, Pastor, go on," said J. Michael. "We should not have interrupted." As Pastor continued, "At last Christmas Eve arrived. Just as Joe had expected, there were no presents to unwrap and enjoy. Although he knew there was no money for presents, and he didn't really expect any, he was still quite sad. He hurt even more for his brothers and sisters. They were younger and really did not understand. There had been hard Christmases before, but never one like this, and as badly as Joe would have liked to buy presents for his brother and sisters, he didn't have any money. The family did have one tradition that neither lack of money nor chicken pox could affect. After the evening meal on Christmas Eve, Joe's father always read the Christmas story, and the family sang Christmas carols. They were doing that and trying to forget that there was no money for the hospital bill or for any presents when someone knocked on their door. It was the same kind neighbour and his wife who had kept the children when their mother had gone to hospital. They had their 4-year-old son with them, and their faces were rosy with the crisp Christmas Eve cold. They were also loaded down with many brightly wrapped packages. Coming through the door into the warm living room, the man said, "We know your family is going through some hard times just now. You have not complained or come begging. In fact, you have been a wonderful Christian example to us. It's Christmas, and we want to share God's blessings with you. These are presents for the children and some money we've set aside. We want you to use it for the hospital bill." Joe's father protested at first, but the neighbours insisted. Finally, Joe's father accepted that this was God's way of providing for his family. The children were excitedly talking about the beautifully wrapped presents when the phone rang. It was the doctor. Joe's little sister was well enough to go home, and they could pick her up in the morning. Part of the hospital bill did have to be paid, though, and the Lord had just provided the money for it. Pastor Gentle paused to catch his breath. So, as Miss Content suggested, the story had a happy ending. On Christmas Day, Joe's new baby sister was finally home, and the family was all together. Because of the friendship and kindness of neighbours, Joe's father had the money to pay what the hospital required, and Joe and his brothers and sisters all had gifts to unwrap and enjoy. It was truly the best Christmas Joe ever had. Remember the scripture verse? "Thine own friend and thy father's friend forsake not, neither go into thy brother's house in the day of thy calamity, for better is a neighbour that is near than a brother far off." We all sat quietly for a few seconds, thinking about the story and how it illustrated the verse Pastor Gentle had read. Izzy spoke up first. "So did you know Joe, Pastor Gentle?" "I certainly did, and do," he answered. "You do too. In fact, you're so close to him, you could touch him." We all looked around at each other. Mr. Thriftmore and Miss Content were looking at each other with as much puzzlement as the rest of us. Only Mr. Friendson and Pastor Gentle were smiling. Suddenly, Sandy stood up. It's you, isn't it, Pastor Gentle? You or our Joe? Again, the lovable gentleman chuckled, and his chest shook up and down. You're right, Sandy. I'm Joe. Who were those kind neighbours? Asked Racer. Do we know them? I think you could say that, answered Pastor shyly. Mr. Friendson, you tell them. All heads turned to our retreat's drill sergeant. He had a knowing grin on his face, and he was gesturing towards the kitchen. The kind neighbours were Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jake. Whoa, really? Now we knew why Pastor Gentle had such admiration and respect for the older people who found so much joy in sitting on the porch of the camp office and watching young people come and go around Camp Friendship. Their demonstration of true friendship had changed one little boy's life many years before, and their camp was changing our lives too. What happened to their little boy? Asked Booker with curious interest. Why doesn't he help them run Camp Friendship? That's another story, answered Mr. Friendson. A very sad story. You see, their son David was my buddy every summer that I came to Camp Friendship. We were very close friends. I always thought we would be buddies in everything. But when I surrendered my life to the Lord for His service, things changed. David became rebellious because he was not willing to follow the Lord. He admitted to me that he thought God wanted him to work in the ministry here at Camp Friendship, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be happy and successful, and he was certain happiness and success could not be found in this ministry. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jake have not heard from him in years. They have tried to find him and hoped he would contact them, but they have never been able to find him. I don't even know if he is alive or dead. How sad, commented Miss Content. It is very sad, agreed Mr. Friendson. They have never given up hope, but only God knows what became of their boy. I still pray for him because he was my buddy.